Think about your own life for a second. How much of it is already tied to a digital screen, right? From the way we work to the way we buy our groceries, the shift is pretty much undeniable. But here's a wild stat for you. In every major financial and identification mandate in modern history, there is a stubborn minority of about 3 to 5% who just flat out refuse to participate. So, what actually happens to them when the global financial system goes fully 100% digital? Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating framework put together by researcher Michael R. Williams. It's all about the collision between our rapidly emerging digital financial system and the people who absolutely refuse to use it. We're looking at what happens when state-of-the-art financial tech meets unyielding human conviction, and it asks some pretty massive questions about the future of our society. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll define the ABCD financial system. Second, we'll look at the resistant remnant. Third, we'll map out the mandate rollout. And finally, we'll unpack the bifurcated equilibrium. Okay, part 1, the ABCD financial system. Let's get right into what this emergent financial architecture actually looks like. So, this whole structure rests on 4 main pillars, brilliantly called the ABCD system. A stands for artificial intelligence, which drives these massive automated financial decisions. B is for biometric identification, meaning literally your physical body becomes your mandatory ID. C is central bank digital currency, so programmable money issued directly from the state. And D, that's digital control, an integrated surveillance layer monitoring the whole network in real time. Now imagine bringing these pieces together in the real world. The implications are staggering. If an AI algorithm suddenly flags a transaction and your biometric scan fails to clear the hurdle, you aren't just inconvenienced, you are completely locked out in seconds. The integration of these pillars creates a system whose coercive power is way beyond just the sum of its individual parts. It becomes a total, all-or-nothing gateway. And there is a really intense objective contrast here. On the one hand, society stands to gain massive conveniences. We're talking lightning-fast transaction speeds, a huge drop in fraud, and unprecedented financial inclusion. But look at the flip side. When AI algorithms are completely opaque, you essentially lose your decisional autonomy. I mean, you can't exactly argue with a black box, right? When biometrics are mandatory, you lose bodily autonomy. And because it's all so incredibly integrated, one single red flag can instantly sever your access to everything: banking, employment, travel, healthcare, all at once. Which brings us to part 2, the resistant remnant. This is where we hit the core human friction in the system. The vast majority of people, we're talking an estimated 95 to 97%, are going to enthusiastically comply. And let's be honest, it makes perfect sense for most of us. We already love tapping our phones for coffee or using Face ID to unlock our lives. Most people will look at this integrated digital system as a massive, convenient upgrade over the clunky systems of the past. But history throws a fascinating curveball here. If you look back over 5 centuries of mandate and resistance episodes, from early paper money rollouts all the way to modern national ID programs, there is always, without fail, a stubborn, resistant remnant of about 3 to 5%. This group simply refuses to participate on pure principled grounds. They are totally willing to operate outside the system, absorbing whatever immense friction comes their way. And these aren't just your everyday contrarians. The framework identifies 5 incredibly diverse motivational substrates for this group. First, religious communities acting on conscience. Second, constitutional civil libertarians protecting civil rights. Third, self-custody cypherpunks obsessed with cryptographic privacy. Fourth, hard money advocates clutching their physical gold or cash. And fifth, communitarian or diaspora networks that rely completely on internal trust. So vastly different groups, right? Yet they share this unyielding conviction to refuse that sits at the very core of their identity. It's a brilliant paradox. Think about it. A traditional community like the Amish, who refuse based on deeply rooted conscience, end up in the exact same bucket as a high-tech cypherpunk relying on heavy encryption. Actually, scratch that. They don't even end up in the same bucket socially. They operate in completely parallel lanes and rarely mix. But to the system administrators looking top-down, their non-participation looks exactly the same. Moving right along to part 3, the mandate rollout. Let's look at what happens when authorities actually attempt to enforce this globally. The framework outlines this spectrum of mandates that creeps in pretty slowly. It kicks off innocently enough with Phase 1, utilizing purely voluntary pilot programs with opt-in perks. Then we shift to Phase 2, where enrollment becomes the implicit default, meaning you have to actively jump through hoops just to opt out. Phase 3 introduces gating, which is the tipping point where basic societal functions like banking or travel become explicitly conditional on your compliance. And finally, Phase 4, full enforcement, active account freezes, and severe penalties. Think of the enforcement strategy like a giant pressure valve. During the rollout, we see this fascinating squeeze-release dynamic. The system tightens its grip, the public pushes back, so authorities release the pressure slightly to calm everyone down, only to tighten it again later. This oscillation isn't an accident. It is a highly deliberate strategy designed to slowly exhaust the resistance over time without causing a massive system-wide shock. When you look at the severity grid here, you can see how brutally the consequences escalate. It starts with minor administrative headaches in Phase 1, maybe some extra paperwork to open an account. By Phase 2, you're getting hit with financial fees. But as we cross into Phases 3 and 4, the stakes absolutely skyrocket. We are talking about a total loss of livelihood, being frozen out of your job, blocked from traveling, or even facing direct criminal sanctions just for transacting outside the approved network. Finally, Part 4, the bifurcated equilibrium. Does the system achieve universal adoption, or does it crush the tiny minority? According to the thesis, the most likely outcome is what's called a bifurcated equilibrium. Put simply, it's a two-track world. Instead of forcing absolute 100% compliance or risking a total system collapse, the massive digital machine and the tiny analog remnant just kind of learn to live in parallel. The main system runs the global economy, while the remnant survives on the fringes using physical cash, precious metals, barter, or mutual aid networks. Which leads us to a really counterintuitive idea, the managed outside hypothesis. Basically, system administrators might actually choose to deliberately tolerate this tiny group. Why? Well, because trying to aggressively suppress them would generate catastrophic legal and reputational damage. It's just not worth the headache. Plus, having a few visible refusers on the margins actually serves a psychological purpose. It makes the 95% feel like their compliance was a free choice, rather than a hard mandate. Because these remnant populations utilize heavily layered constitutional protections, like the First Amendment protecting religious freedom, or state-level biometric privacy laws, they are legally and socially fortified. Allowing a quiet ceiling of tolerated refusal is actually the most stable long-term operating state for the entire system. A protracted legal battle against deep-rooted human convictions, that is a fight administrators usually realize is much smarter to just avoid. The path of least resistance works for both sides. So we'll leave you with this final thought. As this massive, integrated ABCD system continues to emerge globally, will society try to force universal compliance, or will we learn to accept the friction and live in a bifurcated equilibrium? And honestly, if push comes to shove, which side of that equilibrium will you be on? Thanks for exploring this with us.